what's the deal with these cheap airbrushes, and what are they good for? What should you buy a cheap airbrush, or should you not? I'm a fan of the cheap airbrushes for a lot of reasons. The cheap airbrush is not the end all be all, and I also don't think they're the best tool to get started necessarily. And I think that's where a lot of people maybe get things confused. Is if somebody says, oh, you don't need a fancy airbrush, you just get the $30 ones the same. Well, no, it's not the same, and that's where it leads to confusion. Whereas if you try to pretend that this does everything that, like, for example, like the Arden Steinbeck Ultra does, or even the Badger Patriot 105, which is really a lower, in the branded one is one of the lower one. It's definitely not the same at all. And now you get to criticize this. Well, you're wrong with the cheap airbrush. Now, I'm also against people that say, well, there's nothing good that will come out of these little cheap airbrush and you should never use them. Well, also not true. My main argument is, first of all, there's a couple of arguments. I'll get carried away here. I know myself. I'll get carried away talking about this. So the first thing, first of all, if you're getting started and you buy a complete kit, you'll get one of these for free. It costs you maybe, usually like $20 or something, and you have your compressor and a couple of cheap models of airbrush with it. It makes sense to kind of get started with that, and like, you have it. So you have it, you want to play with it and learn. It's fun. It's also a very cool tool to have to just see the difference. I buy my starter kit and I buy also like a beginner airbrush. We're going to keep using the Badger Patriot. I think it's a fine model to start. It doesn't break the bank and everything, so let's keep using that. So you buy your complete kit with free airbrushes, and you also get like a Badger 105 because you don't want to start with the lowest of the low. Well, you get to compare immediately what the difference is. And there is one. There's a bunch. Like the quality of the materials and the trigger is very different. Like, these triggers are really rough. So if you're new at airbrushing, you get like a lot harder time, like controlling this little piece here and how much you pull, how much you push, and all that jazz is part of learning the airbrush. It's like one of the three things. So this makes it hard to learn because it is kind of shitty. I've been doing this 20 plus years. I can handle a shittier trigger, especially because I'm not asking too much of this. I'm not asking a lot of this airbrush, and a lot of miniature painting techniques are not asking a lot of airbrushes. It's for, like, if you look at like the various usage of an airbrush, miniature painting is very, very simple. It does not require insane features that are like unique to miniature painting. In fact, there's zero features that are exclusive to miniature painting. It's always something that from something else, or the middle ground of something else. The example I usually give people is this little attachment where people are like, oh yeah, you get this access to this little attachment here, and it reduces the spray. That is one of the least useful thing in miniature painting. That's used for freehanding art. When it comes to miniature painting, doing like a line of a very specific size over like a wide surface is not really something you try to do often. There are uses for this. For example, if you're painting little rivets and you want to do a little line under each rivet, sure, having this little thing is useful, but it's not like the main thing. Whereas if you do illustrations without this, it's very, very complex. And that's why when you buy these little unbranded ones, it's going to say like airbrush for like nails and cake and miniatures and 17 other different things, because it's pretty what we do as miniature painters, pretty generic overall. So that's kind of the second piece is, we don't, and especially like the beginner technique, we don't need a lot. We're not asking a lot from our airbrush, so we can get away with these limited functions here. And then the third thing is, a lot of the rougher things are simple to do with like a $30 airbrush that you're gonna break. The example I give everybody is the primer, and then this one is really not good. I'm using it out of ego, but I don't really like the Pro Acrylic primer. But airbrush primer is terrible for airbrushes. That's what primer is, right? It's made to be very elastic and very like adhesive. It needs to stick to things. Guess what? Paint being very cohesive and sticking to things is terrible. Is a terrible thing to put inside an airbrush. And if you go, oh well, mine doesn't do that. Well, it's shitty primer. Oh, mine never does that, or I thin it a lot. Well, if you thin it, it stops being good primer. That's kind of the nature of the thing. It's not you. This is what it's supposed to do. So if you stop it doing that, well, what's the point? And also, like you really don't need a lot of like precision when it comes to primer. You just want an even coat. Same thing for varnish. Like if you want to do varnish, I mean, it's not really complex. You want an even coat of varnish, and varnish is way worse than primer if it dries. If you don't clean it properly, if you're doing big batches and it starts to dry, it is like not fun, because like varnish is there to protect your miniature and creates like a coat, like a smooth coat on your mini. Guess what happens if it dries into your airbrush? It creates a smooth coat that's like really resistant, because that's what you want varnish to do. So there's a couple of like uses that I think these things are very well suited for, because why would you want to buy, like, what's the point of buying a $300 airbrush to do primer, or even just to do base coats? Base coats are very simple. I want to put my entire army in blue. This will do that. So there's uses, and then where you get to draw criticism is, of course, oh, this does everything. Not really. As soon as you get into the precision side of things, this is not good. And then you also get into the durability of things. Like this thing is cheap. Everything about this is cheap. It is. You can't tell because it's a video, but this is much lighter than everything. If I look at the needle too long, it might break. I don't need to just, if I stare at it, I just give it the mean eye, might break. It is everything about this is cheap. Even again, I use Badger. Badger is the lower end of the good. Let's say like it's the bottom part of the good airbrushes. Let's put it that way. They're not very expensive, and the pieces don't cost a lot to change. Like you break your Badger needle, is going to cost you like $10 or $20 to change tops. That's really great. Versus something like Iwata, which is like a new Iwata needle is like $60 range. That sucks. These things very, very cheap. And what's even more frustrating, not only are they cheap, but the quality control is usually atrocious with these, because they produce them in bulk, right? Like they make this like if you yourself in your living room with your little credit card and you say, I want to start an airbrush company, and then you go on like a manufacturing website, and you go to China, like the Alibaba manufacturing or whatever, and you want airbrushes, the minimum order quantity is 5,000. That's that's a lot of freaking airbrushes. So the quality control is kind of atrocious, and it's not the same across all brands. Even in the no-named ones that are essentially the same, some of them have higher standards, and some of them they buy the stuff that nobody wants. It happens. It's every like large scale manufacturing has this, where the defects of one place go to the next place. So this is the main issue, is like you're buying for $30, but you maybe you get like a lemon. If you buy a Badger, you get 99% of the time at least the same Badger. Look, I've gotten a lot of Badger airbrushes over the years, because at one point, like for a 2-year span, every tournament gave away Badger airbrushes to winners, and that was one a year that I was playing a lot of tournaments, and I got like a lot of airbrushes out of this. And so I've never had a stinker, never. These ones is about 1 out of 10 probably. I get one. Some brands are better, some brands are worse. So the quality control is really a frustrating thing, especially if you're new and you don't know. If you don't know that this is not how it's supposed to work, it's even more frustrating. So there are some qualities to it, but I think it's also important to understand what you're buying. Like, yes, you're buying this thing cheap, and yes, it has a lot of limits and a lot of stuff that it's not going to be good at. And I would not listen to people that say, oh no, you don't need anything. Well, you might need something else. Can you do a lot with this? Yes. Yeah, I do a lot with this. I use this on the regular. This is probably it's been my main airbrush for the last year, because I don't ask a lot for it though. Like I'm not doing eyes or fancy detail, but I use it to do base coats and rough highlighting and a couple of other cool techniques with it. and it's working fine. The big drawback is this is like rough. So if you're starting and you're not sure if you're gonna like that, you're not setting yourself up for success because you're buying something that's not great. So if you go, oh, I don't know if I like it, well, this is not the tool that makes you like that helps you like it. Whereas if you buy like a very a high end brush, and you go, well, this is very smooth and very easy. So I think that's important, like a distinction or stuff that you need to know if you consider buying these little cheap unbranded airbrush versus a premium model.